Good afternoon. This oral argument proceeding is called to order. For the record, the time is 1:31 p.m. The date is Tuesday, February 1st, 2022. I am Commissioner Jennifer Fielder, the presiding officer and chair of this oral argument proceeding. Appearing with me today, we have Public Service Commissioner Vice Chairman Brad Johnson, Commissioner Tony O'Donnell, and Commissioner Randy Pinocci. Present in the Bollinger Room, and Public Service Commission Chairman James Brown is also present, attending remotely. Staff attorneys Lucas Hamilton and Zach Regala are advising the commission today. This is the noticed oral argument in docket 2020.12.121 regarding L&L Site Services application for a Class D license for Missoula County. The purpose of today's proceeding is to receive closing arguments from L&L Site Services and Republic Services regarding the merits of L&L's application. I note for the record that this argument will be transcribed by our court reporter, Holly Fox of Lasofsky Court Reporting. To ensure that all of those participating today can hear all aspects of the proceeding, please turn on your microphone before you speak and speak directly into it. There's a little on and off button at the base of your mic, and a little blue light will come on when the mic is live. If the proceeding does go off the record, I'd please ask you to turn your microphone off and then turn it back on when we resume. I'd like to move now into introductions from council. Councilors, would you please state your name for the record and who you represent? We'll begin with L&L.
Quentin Rhodes on behalf of L&L. Thank you.
And I'm Allie Garib on behalf of L&L.
Thank you. And for Republic?
William Mercer on behalf of the protestant.
And Brianne McClafferty on behalf of the protestant.
Thank you. We will now provide the opportunity for public comment on this matter. Is there anyone in the room or online that would like to provide public comment regarding this proceeding? If so, please come forward, state your name for the record, and speak into the microphone. I think we can use this microphone right over here. Is this correct? Yep.
Oh, get that. Okay. Hi, I'm Trent Short. I'm a general contractor, and I'm based out of Great Falls. I do work all over the state. And so when I say all over the state, my crews were in Plentywood last week, Red Lodge, had a crew in Missoula and in Bozeman. So, and with that being said, I've read through some of L&L's information request for a permit. I found that my experience through as a general contractor, we've came to a area that maybe is more monopolized, that we actually have really bad service, and it's usually Republic now, since they've moved into the state. The biggest issues that we end up having is either our service is poor or our rates are high, and or both. And Missoula, has been my experience, and as well as other areas within the state. And one example for last year that we had was actually so my normal process is that we would get cans for demo, to maybe demo a building. When we're demoing the building, the service provider, whoever that is, they would send trucks in order for our crews to stay busy. And when I called Republic, they would just send me one driver, and only in the morning. And when you're trying to demo a house or a building or something, you need regular cycles. Otherwise, I ended up having to shut my crews down, and it was supposed to be a 2-day job, and then it turned into a 2-week job. And that was, just one example that I had last year that cost me thousands of dollars. So appreciate everybody's time. Thank you.
Thank you. And before you leave, would you please spell your name for the record?
Oh, yeah, Trent Short, TRENT SHORT.
Thank you very much. Is there any other public comment? Any other public comment? Do we have any public comment online?
We do not.
Okay, seeing no further public comment, we will now move to the argument. I note that we have 2 hours scheduled for this proceeding today, which includes presentations from both LNL and Republic and questioning from the commission. To ensure we have adequate time for questioning, we will limit each party to 30 minutes for their argument. LNL, you will go first with Republic responding, and LNL can reply if it reserves time to do so. I just remind my colleagues on the commission to please ask to be recognized by the chair if you wish to interrupt and ask a quick clarifying question at any time. However, please be mindful that to keep the interruptions to a minimum and save any substantive questions you may have, if any, for the end, so as not to take up the party's allocated time. I will give all commissioners an opportunity to ask questions at the end of each party's arguments. Before we begin, are there any issues that we should address?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. All right, we will now move into LNL's arguments. Council, you may proceed.
Madam Chair, thank you. Members of the commission, thank you for the opportunity to speak to the application today. As I think everybody's familiar, we've had the burden to satisfy 4 elements, and that being the first, that to show that LNL is a fit carrier. Second, to show that there's some sort of public need for the services it's able to provide. The third, to show that the incumbent is not willing or not able to satisfy those services. And fourth, to demonstrate that it won't hurt the public interest for the application to be granted. And so I want to address a few of those issues. The first being, of course, LNL's fitness. I think that given the testimony and evidence in this case, as well as its performance in Gallatin County after being granted the Class D permit in that marketplace, that there's very few arguments against its fitness. So I won't spend a lot of time on that. But I do want to emphasize the one aspect of its fitness that may not be unique to it, but is certainly characteristic of it. And that is its ability to grow and to provide service at an increasing rate to a relatively large market in a very short time, and the sort of the management competence that it has demonstrated in being able to do that. One of the things that people fear is success. And you can have a small organization that works like a well-oiled machine. If you grow too fast, your customers get unhappy, your employees get unhappy, your profits go down, and you can really hurt yourself by growing faster than you're capable or competent to do. And I think that I would put emphasis on all the evidence in this case that you've seen that LNL is able to handle that kind of growth and has been very successful in managing it and keeping its customers happy, keeping its employees productive and happy, and keeping its bottom line well into the black. So the second question is need. And we had the testimony of 8 shippers from Missoula County from a variety of marketplaces within the county. We had the airport, we had the large apartment complex, we had the 2 merchants, and we had the residential testimony. And it was universally that they want competition. And the reasons that they want competition is varied. Some of the folks were not happy with the service that was being provided. Some of the folks were not happy with the price. But in particular, the sort of the take it or leave it attitude that was demonstrated by some of the conduct that was testified to, and that inability for folks to choose, to say, we need a remedy here. We need an opportunity either to come to the PSC and say, look, you need to do something about the prices that we're paying, or to come to the PSC and say, look, you need to do something about the quality of service, or go to a competitor and say, can you give us a better price, or go to a competitor and say, we need a better service or a kind of service that's not even provided. And that was the testimony of all of the shippers. And I'll acknowledge that it's anecdotal, and there's only 8 of them. But given the amount of time that we had and the records that were stipulated to by all of the other shippers in the case, we think it's powerful evidence, both in its substance, but also in the lack of any rebuttal. So, we had the score here is 8-0. Republic had an opportunity to put satisfied shippers on in front of you and give testimony about how they're happy with that service. And we didn't see a single solitary one who gave that testimony or talked about how happy they were and satisfied they were. And it's interesting because there's some 40,000 shippers in Missoula County that Republic serves. And so you would think that somebody would step forward and be willing to testify that I'm happy with the price, I'm happy with the service, I'm happy with both. And the fact that no one would is a good indicator, I think, that there's a problem. And we can speculate about why they didn't show up. But I think that the reason they didn't show up is because that they may have had good things to say, but ultimately they had bad things to say. And so Republic didn't want to hear from them. And so they didn't put them on. And so, even though we have anecdotal evidence from the shippers who testified, that's the tradition of the PSC. That's how it makes decisions traditionally, is listening to shippers and taking care of their wants and taking into account their needs and desires. And so that's been unequivocal in this case. And I think it's very important when it comes to showing need. But we've got more evidence than just the shipper evidence with respect to need. We have the evidence of the survey. And it's interesting, I think it's going to be argued by Republic, and I've seen it argued in some of their submissions, that this survey sort of vindicates the satisfaction that they've been able to generate in Missoula County. But if you drill into the survey, you find that it's the opposite, that in fact, the survey shows some glaring problems. And the first being the price. 50% of the shippers and the survey respondents, I should say, representing 50% of the shippers in the county, said they're not happy and not satisfied with the price they're being charged. So that's 1 out of 2. Every other door, as you go down the street, the people are not happy about the price. And you say, well, why is that? Why aren't they happy about the price? Well, one of the things you can look at is what's the price being charged in the other markets by any shipper. And if you look at Exhibit 8, for example, and you see the price information about the other markets, you'll see that the people who pay the most for shipping are the people in Missoula County. And you'll see that if you look at the prices that Republic charges in the different markets, you'll see that Republic charges its highest rates in Missoula County. For example, if you compare the city of Missoula with the city of Whitefish, you'll see that the price that the people in Whitefish pay is 1/2 of what we pay in Missoula County. Another way to look at it, we pay twice as much as the folks in Whitefish. And you'll see in Great Falls, they're almost, well, put it this way, we in Missoula County pay 2,700% of what they pay in Great Falls. That's almost 3 times what they pay. The city of Missoula pays almost 3 times what they pay in the city of Great Falls for Republic services. So you can see that objective evidence, the data, we like to talk about data these days. You can see that the data supports the anecdotal evidence that have been given by the shippers. And you can see that the data supports the survey evidence, where 50% of those surveyed said the price is too high, that Republic is charging a price that's too high in Missoula County. So the price evidence is compelling. And you can see also in Exhibit 8 what happens when you get competition in Gallatin County, or what happened, I should say. The pricing behavior of Republic changed. So if you go through the chart and you see those price differences, there's a chart with the shipper, the original price, the price quoted by L&L, and then the price quoted by Republic in response to L&L. And you'll see consistently those prices go down. And so it might be tough on Republic with respect to its profits. It might be tough on L&L with respect to its profits, but it's good for, it's the shippers. So those prices are better in Gallatin County now because of this competition than they were before. And that's the evidence that we have in the case. We do have economic theory on our side, I believe. Dr. Cross testified to that. Dr. Tyler couldn't refute it. He said, well, it depends. It's equivocal. It's not clear one way or the other. But nobody came in and said, well, competition's going to make for higher prices every time. Not even Dr. Tyler, who was hired and paid handsomely by Republic, would testify to that. And ultimately, doesn't that just comport with common sense? Obviously, if you have to compete, you're going to do it in two ways. One is your price. The second is the quality of your service. How else are you going to do it? And so if you have someone who's breathing down your neck for customers, you're not going to behave in a fat, dumb, and happy way and take it or leave it. And price goes up, the quality goes down on a regular basis. You're going to compete. You're going to compete hard, and you're going to go for those customers. And that's what happened in Gallatin County. There's no reason that's been suggested in this case why it won't also happen in Missoula County. Speaking more of quality, if we look at the survey, a fifth of the people surveyed said they were dissatisfied with the size and quality of Republic's waste containers. So 1 out of 5 have dissatisfaction with the size and quality of the waste containers, and they've got no choice. Again, they can't come to you. They can't go to a competitor. It's take it or leave it. And in some of the submissions that we've seen, Republic has said, well, they can haul it themselves. But that's sort of a silly argument, isn't it? I mean, how many people, you know, you've got, you're living in town, you have a Subaru station wagon, 3 kids you got to get to school, then you got to get to work, and you got to haul your garbage. That's, you know, it's almost insulting to suggest that as a viable alternative for 90% of the people out there. So, well, a fifth of the people are unable to satisfy their desire for higher quality containers and higher and better size, more sizes, more a variety of sizes. 19% said they're dissatisfied with Republic's customer service. So again, you've got a problem where a fifth of the people, 1 out of 5, has experienced a problem that can't be resolved by Republic. 19% of the survey participants said that they had made requests of Republic for waste hauling services that Republic just flat declined to provide. So there are a fifth of the people who responded to this survey said they had asked for something by way of hauling services from Republic, and Republic just said no. They didn't quote a high price. They didn't say we'll do it and come in 2 months. They just said flat no. So not only do we have poor quality service, we have a failure of service for a fifth of the people in this survey. And then 17% said they were dissatisfied with the overall quality. So again, almost a fifth of the people look at the quality of the service that they're getting in the survey, and they said they're dissatisfied. So you have 17% of the people without a remedy. And then finally, 10% were dissatisfied with schedule and frequency of service, and 8% said they were dissatisfied with the location. And remember, for example, Republic requires people in the wintertime to bring their garbage to a pickup stop, a particular place, if they're in a rural area and these big urban trucks can't get to where they need to go because of the snow, then the customer has to, or the shipper has to find a way to get that container down to the common drop-off point and then find a way to get it back after it's emptied, either at the end of the day or the next day. So you have a service that's not being offered, and that is the service of picking up the container at the residence. And you may recall the testimony of Lance Johnson, who said, we have specialized equipment for that. We have small 4-wheel drive trucks that can get back into the rural areas and can provide that service so that people don't have to leave their garbage at a common point all day, right? So we're going to have either animals or people who have access to that garbage at a remote spot. And we have, of course, the time, trouble, and effort of having to put our container there and go fetch it after it's done. So you've got these problems in either poor services or no services or overpriced services. So how do we address that? Well, one way, really the only way for you to address that is to grant the application. And what will come to Missoula County if the application is granted? Well, first of all, again, you've got the downward pressure on price, but you also have this pressure with respect to service, the enhancement of service. And what are the different ways those services services would be enhanced by L&L. I've already talked about the customer service. And at L&L, ultimately, the CRTs know the drivers. They're in communication with the drivers for L&L. And they get the problem solved by working with the shipper and the driver for missed pickups or other kinds of problems. And it doesn't go past the CRT. But if it does, if you live in Gallatin County and you have a problem with L&L, you can talk to the owner. The owner will address your problems. And that's a big difference with Republic. You're never going to talk to an owner of Republic, no matter how bad your problems. And so it's sort of, the Montana way of doing business, where you have people who know their neighbors, know their customers, care about them, and will work to address their problems rather than the corporate bottom line back in wherever it might be. The other enhanced service is, reasonable overage policies. L&L does have problems with overages now and then, and they will charge overages if they have what they call frequent flyers, and that is shippers who sort of abuse the privilege. But they allow for an extra bag of garbage to go with a full container. They allow for, one-offs now and then without charging an overage. And I think also very important is the fact that they don't offer their drivers bounties for overages. So you've got Republic, who gives rewards, monetary rewards to the drivers if they identify overages. And the interesting thing about that and the evidence in this case is we saw different charges on the invoices for overages. We heard testimony about overages. And the policy that Republic insists on, they claim that, we don't charge overages unless the driver takes a photograph of the overage. And one of the things that we didn't see in this case, of lots of different kinds of evidence we could have seen that wasn't provided, but one thing in particular was that we didn't see a single photograph of an overage that coordinated with an overage charge on an invoice. And so these drivers are getting bounties for overages. They're supposed to purportedly take pictures of these overages, but they're either not taking pictures of the overages. If they do take pictures, there's no overage, or some other explanation that we haven't heard for the visual evidence not matching up with the invoice evidence. So with L&L, you'll get reasonable overage policies. With Republic, you'll get abusive ones. And that will just continue unabated with no remedy. Regular bulk pickup. L&L offers regular bulk pickup. It's got a driver out every day. You heard Lance Johnson testify that they have a driver out every day, and that's all he does is bulk pickup. And when you call L&L, they do bulk pickup that day, unlike Republic. But the other thing that they do is they negotiate a price before the pickup. So you know what that price is going to be and whether you think it's worth it for the bulk pickup. Republic doesn't do it that way. What Republic does is they'll pick it up maybe that day, maybe a few days later, but you'll get to know how much it costs when they send you an invoice. They won't tell you ahead of time what it's going to cost, and then you'll pay the invoice, or they'll cease their service. So you really don't have any choice. Again, take it or leave it attitude, fat, dumb, and happy. L&L doesn't have hidden fees. It uses a bottom line pricing model where you don't have these fuel recovery charges. You don't have overage fees. You don't have bulk pickup prices you're not expecting. You get a monthly charge. And if you're on a tight budget, it's something that you can budget, and you know that that's what it's going to cost every month, and you can expect it. L&L doesn't use contracts. And we heard the testimony of the airport that said we can't change our recycler, even though we're very unhappy with Republic service, because Republic insists on enforcing our 3-year term contract. So we can't change. And you heard the testimony of Lance Johnson says we don't use contracts. And if you aren't happy with the service and you want to change, just let us know and you can change. But one interesting thing about the service that L&L offers is its respect for the noise ordinance. And it takes off at 7 a.m. and doesn't, Republic starts at 2 or 3 a.m. and they're picking up trash before 7, and they don't really care if it's loud and noisy, if it disturbs your sleep. They run their trucks long shifts, 10 and 12-hour shifts. That's why they start so early. and they have to be done by a certain hour to get to the dump in time. Running those long shifts not safe for the drivers. It's not safe for the public. L&L runs 8-hour shifts, and think about that effect on quality, right? At the end of an 8-hour shift, the drivers are probably tired. If they have to work 2 or 4 more hours, the quality of their service is going to go down, not just the safety of themselves and the public, but how well they do their jobs is not going to be as good. And so not only is the noise ordinance important, but the safety of the drivers, the quality of the service, and finally, peculiar to Montana, we have bear problems, obviously. And if you have to put out your garbage before 7 a.m, so Republic will pick it up, you have to put it out the night before. And it's an open invitation for the bears to come and start turning over your containers and causing other trouble. And that's a safety issue for not only humans, but most important, the bears. And everybody knows a fed bear is a dead bear. So the L&L has respect for the safety ordinance, and for a variety of reasons, that's a good thing for customers. It's a good thing for bears. I talked about the specialized equipment, but they also have a reliable, and we heard the public testimony about that, a reliable roll-off service, so that if a contractor needs a roll-off service, they just ask. L&L comes and takes it away. Republic, and you've heard the testimony from Lance Johnson on this, doesn't do it that way. You can call and Republic may come and get your container, or you may have to call Lance and say, bring us a container so that we can get rid of our materials in Gallatin County. And so you'll have 2 containers there. You have Republic container, full and unemptied, and you'll have L&L's container, because they offer a good service, and they'll do that in Missoula County. Video capture. This is an interesting one. Video capture is important for service and safety. In particular, you've got the trucks at L&L with forward-facing and rear-facing cameras. And so that disciplines the drivers to do a good job, to drive safely, and to be accountable. So if there is a problem, management can correct it by looking at the video with the driver and making sure that if there are problems, they're accounted for. And if there are disputes with shippers, that video will help resolve whether there was an overage or not, or otherwise. And finally, just from a public perspective, law enforcement in Gallatin County knows that L&L's trucks have cameras. And so if there's a crime or there's an auto accident, they know that one possible source of information and evidence about those events are the L&L trucks. And finally, again, there's greater shipper choice. There's just in 2 ways, right? They can, if you grant this permit, they can choose between vendors, and then L&L, if they choose L&L, will have more and different kinds of receptacles and services that they offer that Republic doesn't offer, and doesn't show any sign of wanting to offer. So there's at least a dozen different kinds of service improvements that come with an L&L permit. And they've shown that in Gallatin County, and there's really no reason why they won't be able to do it in Missoula County. Finally, I've read in some of the submissions that there's a question about whether L&L can serve the whole county on the first day. Well, there's a couple of things to think about there. One, the example that they give is Yellowstone, West Yellowstone rather, in Gallatin County, and how at the beginning, L&L didn't offer service in West Yellowstone. But more interesting is the fact that now, you know who serves West Yellowstone? Not Republic, L&L. So what L&L did is figured out a way to outbid Republic in West Yellowstone. They used larger containers, and that requires fewer trucks up and down the canyon between West Yellowstone and Bozeman, fewer trips, and it means a cheaper price for the shippers in West Yellowstone. So it's actually an excellent example of how issuing the permit in Gallatin County has been a good thing for the public. Furthermore, Montana law doesn't require that L&L has to serve the whole county, but to be eligible for a Class D permit. Administrative Rules of Montana, Section 38-3-1201 through 1203 make that clear. And in particular, 1203 says a Class D carrier is one that serves 20 customers per month each month of the year, or can show its Class D service generates not less than 5,000 gross revenue per calendar year. If it does either one of those things, it's presumed to be eligible for a Class D permit. And in this case, based on the experience that L&L had in Gallatin County, I think that it's pretty clear that it's eligible for that status. And given the growth it experienced and the successes it experienced in Gallatin County and its ability to serve the far reaches of that county, which similar to Missoula is kind of oddly shaped and hard to get to, there's no reason to think they can't do the same thing and have the same success for their company and provide enhanced benefits for the public, just as they did in Gallatin County. So in our view, if you grant this permit, you won't have to worry about, or you, at least the consumers will have the option of not having to worry about things like fuel recovery rates based on national averages instead of local conditions, and the sorts of kind of take it or leave it attitude that Republic has in Missoula County and used to have in Gallatin County before it faced that competition. And so we think that, the four criteria are easily met in this case, and we'll be willing to entertain questions later. But I've spoken for 25 minutes, and Madam Chair, if I could reserve those last 5 minutes for rebuttal, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Council, and the record shows you have 6 minutes reserved.
Thank you.
Thank you. Council for Republic, Mr. Mercer. Oh, excuse me, wait a second. I'm sorry. I promised I would allow questions at the end of each party's commentary. So do we have any questions from commissioners at this point?
Procedural question.
Mr. Vice Chair.
If we reserve our questions until after both parties have spoken, can we then question both parties at the end rather than now?
I don't see why not, Mr. Vice Chair. Okay, and seeing no questions from commissioners. I can't see the Chairman Brown at all. Philip.
Madam Chair, with the Vice Chair's clarification, I'll withhold my question at this time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are there any questions from commission staff at this time?
No, Commissioner.
Okay, great. We are ready to move into the arguments from Republic. Mr. Mercer, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And the structure of the argument today will open with some backdrop information and history, turn to the legal construct at play, and then break each of those tests down as we see the facts fitting into them. Starting with the backdrop, we were here, as you all know, in 2018 on an application that this commission denied in 2019. And the determination in the lengthy order was that there was no showing of public need as part of that application. The snapshot that the commission is now trying to review is the period after that proceeding, the period from August 29, 2019 to the present. Is there a change that would demand the commission to grant this application? We obviously think that the facts suggest that if there's change, it's not change that demands a different outcome. And more importantly, in thinking through the environment in which this period entails, we believe that the commission needs to consider the fact that all of the services rendered by the incumbent have been done during the pandemic. And whatever our respective positions are in the pandemic, it's clear that what that meant to operations of any public utility, Northwestern MDU, and a utility like Republic that serves every single customer that wants service in Missoula County and touches them every day, frankly, touches them in a way that some of the other entities that you regulate probably doesn't do so as directly. It's a substantial burden that we believe the record that has been set forth demonstrates how well those services have been rendered. Other things that are really significant in this docket that weren't present in the docket in 2018. There are similarities, certainly. There were attempts by L&L to get shipper witnesses to show up at the proceeding in 2018. This time, L&L came to the commission and said, we want you to utilize your subpoena power and issue 60 subpoenas to people in Missoula County. Only 8 showed up and participated. We think that's instructive in terms of the demand. Another very significant difference in this proceeding is the fact that we do have a survey, and we had testimony from Mr. Flaherty in terms of the methodology and what was done. And that's a really different aspect to this docket. In a community of 100,000 people, there was a survey of 15,000 people who received text messages. And to be very clear, as you know, the text messages said that the survey was about garbage hauling in Missoula, that participation in that survey could result in more choices. And finally, the survey would only take 7 minutes of time. Out of those 15,000 touches, 784 individuals decided on those terms, I might be able to have more choices. This pertains to my garbage service, and it'll only take 7 minutes. Only 784 people said, I think I'll do that. Of that group, 224 got into the survey and said, I'm not interested. So a sample of 15,000, there was 3.7% that took time to respond. And what you heard from Mr. Rhodes was, well, there are some data that suggest that maybe people aren't happy about price or about container size. Starting point of the analysis should be 96.3% of the people did not express enough of an interest about the service that they were serving and any concern about it to say, I'll take that survey. And then the thing that we obviously see very differently than L&L, 81% of the people utilizing that public utility said, we are pleased with the services that we are receiving from Republic. And as we said and tried to draw out in the hearing, if you did that same sort of survey with MDU or with Northwestern, would people say, I think maybe I pay more than I'd like to pay? Or would they say, it'd be great if I had more choices? I think most consumers typically would say, I wish I could pay less and I wish I could have more choices. The question is, when you have 15,000 people who are asked a question and only 584 decide to answer it, and of that group, 81% say they're pleased with the services, do you have a public need in this community? They ask you to treat the 8 people that came in as live witnesses as proxies and to overlook all of the data that you have in front of you from this survey. And that's a very significant change from the hearing that we had before. Another thing that deserves amplification. There are elected officials in Missoula County. Missoula County is served by 3 county commissioners. City of Missoula is served by a mayor and a city council. Those entities are not proponents of this application. To the extent that we believe that the public is represented through their elected representatives, the commission should find it persuasive that those elected officials have not come before the commission and said, we need L&L in this market. That's, in our view, very, very significant. You heard from Mr. Rhodes also just now about there weren't shippers testifying in favor of Republic. I think that you will hear from your counsel that the burden is not only with the applicant, but the burden for shippers as witnesses to say there is a basis for the application is certainly with the applicant as opposed to the protestant. And we obviously don't have a burden to start calling witnesses. I think the commission should also look at the fact that we have a survey that talks about the way the public perceives the services being rendered. And we have local government officials that on behalf of their people are not standing up and advocating that there needs to be a new entrant in this market. Also, I think one of the things we all know about the city of Missoula and its citizens and the county, it's an engaged population. They're very interested in the operations of local government. They're very interested and engaged in a number of different questions. The city of Missoula, when it decided that it wasn't getting the response that it needed from its water utility, they took action, and there were citizens that supported that action. This record is bare in that regard. And once again, that should be extremely important in terms of your determination about, is there a public need? You've got to decide if you're going to give a lot of weight to 8 shippers or if you're going to think about all of this other proof. And as we assess it, it is a mountain of proof in favor of Republic and a very limited amount of testimony in favor of the applicant. Let me turn now. I promised I was going to go into the law. We see the law a little bit differently than what you heard from Mr. Rhodes. You've got a statutory construct that you have to comply with. You have case law that has grown out of the various decisions that the commission's made over time that you have to comply with. And then most importantly, you have an order that you issued in 2019 where you gave anyone who was going to make an application in a Class D docket very clear guidance that they need to comply with. Very quickly on the first part of the test, we think that you need to focus on the second prong. I'll get into it in greater detail later, but likelihood of the proposed service being permanent and continuous throughout the 12 months of the year. And we think you also need to be very cautious about the next prong of the test, which is the effect that the proposed transportation service may have on other forms of transportation service or that might be affected by the proposed transportation service. Not that there's a certainty it will, but that there is a risk that it may. Secondly, you heard also about from Mr. Rhodes about the test that's evolved over case law. And he talked a bit about fitness. We're going to talk about fitness as well, but we don't believe that when the commission balances the need prong and those additional prongs in either test, that it can be said that the applicant has met its burden. Finally, as I said, the third construct, and so significant to this case, because it starts on page 27 of your order and it goes to page 28, and it is absolutely binding in terms of what you can do in this case. And let me just hit the high points. In paragraph 104, you said that with respect to profit margins, the commission lacks sufficient comparative evidence in this docket to reach a conclusion. And having made that conclusion, you then said in paragraph 105, without evidence to investigate these issues, the commission's analysis is less robust. To address these issues, the commission puts all future applicants and protestants in Class D PCN applications concerning large and complex service areas on notice that both parties will be expected to provide operational and market analysis to support their arguments. And the order cites the Roselle case, and it says, the parenthetical says, that case puts the protestant on notice of the commission's expectation of future performance. Then in 107, you specifically said this operational and market analysis could include, among other evidence, 1, comparative operative margin analysis, 2, market concentration analysis, 3, price and route comparisons, 4, business plans with sufficient route service options, and other pertinent information. This record on behalf of the applicant is bare in that regard. We spent a lot of time bringing the proof that they had a business plan in 2008 that was totally insufficient and then decided not to do one this time. You have no route analysis. You have no idea where they're going to serve. They have admitted in all those outlying counties, they haven't even studied it. There is absolutely no way that this test that you established to try to say, we need more in trying to determine what need is. And to do it, you have to help us. Now, Republic stepped up and said, we're going to hire an economist that is a specialist in the area of garbage hauling. And we are going to explain why we don't believe that their assertions about an entrant in a new market having the effects that they say it will on price. And so we believe that we met the burden that was established by the test. But all of these different things that were suggested as things that L&L could do, and in fact should do, they didn't do. And for that reason, we believe, frankly, the case ends right there. You don't have the empirical case that you ask them to establish as part of that test. You cannot reach the conclusions on public need that troubled you in 2019 because they didn't do it. And we believe that really the case ends right there on the failure to meet those legal burdens. But obviously, we're going to talk about the balance of the way they don't meet the balance of those statutory and case law tests. So turning to fitness, the core argument on fitness is the application says that the applicant wants to serve all points in Missoula County. Mr. Rhodes just said something effective. There's an ARM provision that doesn't suggest that you have to have a Class D carrier that is serving everyone in a territory or a large number of customers in the territory. Our position is different. Our position is the applicant has said, I want to serve everyone in Missoula County. There's not going to be a part of that county that I don't serve. So you've got to look when the test says, are they able to provide that service on a continuous basis over the 12-month period? Application says, I want to serve the entire county. And the statute says, can the applicant do it over a 12-month period? There's no business plan to allow you to know where they would serve, what routes they would do, and how they would serve it. The budget that you saw set forth that we talked about a lot in this case had financial projections allotting $400,000 for salary expenses in year one, which leaves very little room for drivers and a bookkeeper and everything else to serve the entire county. You have Republic State in the record in terms of what it takes for it to serve customers in Greeno and Houston and Seeley Lake and Condon and the city of Missoula. And you can't do it with a budget of $400,000 for personnel costs. It hasn't analyzed the number of customers in each of the hauling markets. That's part of the record. And it's telling to us that the understanding of L&L hasn't expanded from where it was when we were here in 2018. It is as if the facts to support the case and the due diligence to say, here's how we're going to serve the market is no more advanced now than it was then. It hasn't demonstrated through the facts that it has an intent to serve all of the county. It couldn't identify the number of customers it intended to serve in the first year. It provided inconsistent testimony about staffing, how it would deal with unionization of drivers in the market, and has provided very vague estimates in terms of its financial projections and says that those projections are based upon year one in Gallatin County. So on the whole point about fitness, can you say that it is fit to provide what it has applied to do in year one as the statute requires? And can you conclude that it's fit based upon the things that you said that you needed to see from applicants in complicated markets when it didn't provide you with any of that information? That is why we've persisted in arguing in this case that L&L is not fit. It might have been fit if it said, we're going to provide a small service in this segment of the community. We have this number of employees that will work it. These are the routes we're going to run. You can construct a case in which the fitness argument would be harder for us to make, maybe impossible, but not on this record. Not when the argument was we're going to serve all comers with this budget, this pool of assets, and without any sort of details that should allow you to conclude whether they can do what they say they want to do or not. You also heard from Dr. Tyler on the question of what you really should fear is what's going to happen is they're going to gravitate to the densely populated markets where they can serve people economically. And that is a problem because that's precisely what they said they weren't going to do, because that's got a lot of negative externalities that the commission would struggle with. And we'll talk about those near the end of the argument. Then the question becomes, is Republic meeting the current need? We've talked about the survey. We've talked about the fact that the applicant doesn't have any support from either the county or the city. But you also heard from Ms. Luttrell from the Chamber of Commerce. You heard from Shane Stack from the county. And you heard from testimony from Republic witnesses about the commitment that it's demonstrated to meet the need of customers, but also to do a number of other community service things for free in the community where the city and the county need help. It is not only providing good service to customers, but it is a wonderful partner for the community. You also have heard that there's a sense that where there are problems in terms of customer service, they're not going to put their head in the sand. You heard Mr. Moss talk repeatedly about what he discovered when he took over as general manager and what he needed to do, once again, right in the middle of COVID, what he needed to do to ensure that if customers had complaints, if there was a missed pickup, those things are being logged appropriately and monitored. So there was an assessment and an understanding of where the company wasn't meeting its expectations. He is attempting to implement what Republic wants to do nationally, and that it is held out as its national standards, because once you begin deviating from those national standards, then obviously there may be problems in terms of whether you're doing what you should as a public utility. And the record suggests that from his time in the job, he was committed to trying to make sure that excellence was being delivered. You did hear testimony from allegations about 2017 or 2018. And once again, this question is there a need that's been demonstrated after the commission concluded there was no need in 2019? What you can know is that from his time here, he has been attempting to deliver the services that the commission expects, that customers expect, and that Republic expects. You just heard Mr. Rhodes talk about overages, and this is obviously a point of dispute. I would call it a point of difference of business practices. Mr. Johnson admits that he charges for overages. There's testimony in the record that says it's standard in the industry. You don't want to be able to have people pay for one thing and then try to jerry-rig it in a way that they are getting freebies by essentially going beyond the capacity they're paying for. It's true that we have people the drivers have to photograph pictures of overages in order to document it, and customers, if they've got a concern, they can ask for that and they can get that information. If you're trying to incentivize people to comply with the rules that you've established, you've got to do that somehow. And we think that this is a permissible business practice and one that is essentially trying to get people to not only get proper size containers, but not take advantage of a system that where they're trying to get something that they're not paying for. Another thing that I think deserves attention, along with the observations about the partnership in Missoula County, is one of the reasons that we believe that Republic has such a good track record in Missoula is that there's a relationship with the county and the city on initiatives that they care about. And once again, those may not be initiatives that the commission is that excited about or various policymakers are that excited about, but in the city of Missoula, the county and the city are very committed to recycling. They're very committed to sustainability. And the Zero Waste Initiative is something that they are very committed to. Republic has been a partner in all of those efforts. And even when you can make an argument, maybe in the long term, it's not in the benefit of Republic that those efforts advance. And yet nationally, they're committed to those efforts and a full partner with the county and the city on them in Missoula. Now, I want to pivot to something that I said about the statutory test that we ask you take great care with. And that is the prong that asks, will the applicant's entry affect a proposed transportation service, not necessarily a regulated one, but a proposed transportation service to the detriment potentially of the public interest? And of course, the things that we've harped on are are rural customers going to be ill-served in the event that L&L comes in here and cherry picks certain routes, leaves the rural customers to Republic, thereby driving up costs of those customers? Is that going to be a problem? We think there's evidence in the record to suggest that could be a problem. And that's what the tests demand. Not that there's certainty, but there could be a problem. Same thing with recycling. If you have people paying a price for recycling now, and someone who comes into the market that doesn't offer recycling, thereby charging a lower price because they're not offering that service, is that going to drive customers away from the incumbent to the new applicant? And is that going to have a detriment in terms of how those recycling services are offered? We think that there's plenty of evidence in the record to suggest that those are real concerns and concerns that the commission needs to evaluate. This falls in, you heard Mr. Rhodes say this is the Montana way. The problem with this is you're taking a system that, once again, the county isn't objecting to the incumbent, city isn't objecting to the incumbent, and you're asking 8 shipper witnesses to change the way this market works. Are you going to cause damage if you do this? And we believe that this test, where you're supposed to be focusing on the public interest, we believe that if you look before you leap, you're going to conclude that there are risks to going down that road. And we certainly encourage you to look very carefully at that. I want to talk a little bit more also about what Dr. Tyler said about those issues. He explained that the entry of another hauler would result in lower economies of density and economies of scale for Republic, make it more expensive to serve customers on a per customer basis. He also noted that lower economies pose a real risk to rural customers, that they could see a price increase at a disproportionate rate. If you go and review the testimony in the old record, which is all part of this record, you'll hear from Commissioner Jean Curtis, who testified that she had grave concerns about how customers in Condon, where she grew up, would be affected by L&L coming into the market. The idea that pricing could go up to a point where people would stop using the service, which Republic is providing at a reasonable rate, and begin throwing their garbage back into various public lands and other places where we don't want garbage. Dr. Tyler's opinion is also supported by economic literature analyzing garbage hauling. Is not always the case that more competition equals better pricing. And it is not as simple as Dr. Cross's testimony would have you believe. And we believe in the battle of the experts. If you look at the credentials, you'll find that one of them has a lot of experience looking at issues in this sector of the economy and the other one doesn't. We also believe the commission should consider the other externalities about the road miles and the fact that at a time in which both those local governments are worried about zero carbon emissions, that in the event that this application is granted, that we're going to be putting more trucks on the roads of the county. So I want to wrap up by saying the first question is, can they get by the legal construct that you imposed in the 2019 order? We don't think that's even a close call. We don't believe that when you balance the test that's set forth in the statute and in the case law, that all those factors need to be weighed. And we believe that when you look at need alone, which is obviously the most important, that there's plenty of evidence in this record to suggest that they don't meet their burden on need. We also think that there isn't a question about whether the incumbent has the assets, the initiative, the management, and the deployment to meet the demand. And we think that's reflected in the way that the survey data showed up, and the way that the fact that both the county government and the local government are not proponents for the applicant's application. I mentioned at the outset that nothing has changed since you said that there wasn't a public need in 2019 in any material way. Have there been changes? Yeah, there's been a change. There's been a major pandemic that affected the way people staffed operations, the way people were being able to hire. You heard plenty of testimony in terms of those challenges that were presented during the period. But keep in mind that those survey results are results that were generated in 2021. That suggests a high degree of satisfaction weathering the storm of the pandemic in an industry in which we're seeing customers at least once a week, usually probably in some instances more than that. So direct interaction, direct opportunities to evaluate how those services are rendered. They want 8 shipper witnesses to overcome all of those other facts that you have in terms of people's perception of need. I'm going to conclude with this. Because L&L didn't follow the admonition in the 2019 order about providing all this supplemental information that would allow the commission to have a better set of empirical data to reach this conclusion. What Mr. Johnson is really asking you to do is to rely on his word. He is not giving you a business plan or routes that he would run. He's essentially saying, you need to trust me. And I would encourage you to look back at the cross-examination on various points because they're significant in terms of what's at issue here. On profit margin, he told the commission that he was more than happy to serve anyone that wanted to buy his services in Missoula County. But on cross-examination, we established that he said in his deposition that he was seeking a profit margin of 25%. That testimony is completely at odds with what he told you when he wanted you to believe that he was prepared to serve anyone who wanted to sign up for his services in the county. Second issue on this point. He noted that in in Gallatin County, from the onset of the operation, L&L served all customers everywhere. On cross-examination, he had to admit that in the hearing in 2019-18, he specifically said, we didn't serve West Yellowstone at the beginning. And the only reason why we got into that market was because of how we got beaten up in this hearing in 2018. He wanted you to believe before cross-examination that he has a history of being in all places for all people, but had to admit that that was wrong. And then finally on recycling, you heard a lot about Gone Green and about how, he was in recycling, but then he just let Gone Green take it over. We established on cross-examination that, in fact, the website says they don't offer recycling. There's no mention of Gone Green. And critically here, the testimony that we brought out on cross is he abandoned recycling in Bozeman for one reason. It wasn't profitable. He wants you to believe that he will be interested in doing recycling in Missoula because he knows that's something the community wants. But he's got a track record in a community that probably has not much less of an interest in recycling than Missoula, Bozeman, where he specifically abandoned offering those services because it wasn't profitable. So you've got, when he's asking you to vouch, we want you to believe that what he's telling you is straight up. You've got a record that suggests he's trying to convince you that he will be all things to all people, but the history doesn't suggest that. So I appreciate the commission's consideration and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. And we will now go back to the council for, well, let's see. Do any commissioners have any questions at this point, or would you like to wait until the total end? Commissioner O'Donnell.
I'm sorry, clarify, what do you mean by
Well,
now as opposed to later?
per the vice chair's request earlier, we can finish the parties and then we can have the questioning from the commissioners at that time.
Oh, I thought we were done. With
Well, both
Sorry.
parties have spoken and now L&L has their 6 minutes that they
right.
reserved. So we're going back for that. So we get 6 minutes for you to wrap up and then we will go to questions from the commissioners and staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. The point about market concentration is not well taken in that we know what the market concentration is. There's one provider. And so we don't, what analysis would we do beyond that? There's one provider. There's no choice. There's no choice with respect to seeking regulatory relief. There's no choice with respect to seeking a competitor. It's a market concentration of one. And those 20% of the people who said they're unhappy have no choice. The business plan here is Gallatin County, right? What L&L proposes is to bring the benefits that it gave to Gallatin County in the competition that it has brought to Gallatin County to Missoula County. And the way they're going to do that, they testified to not only Mr. Johnson, but the people that he hired. They're people who have actual experience in that county, serving it at all far reaches of that county. And so, we could have a market plan that says we're going to do this, that, and the other on paper, but if we don't have the people to implement it, it doesn't matter. What matters is, do we have the people to do it? And clearly we do have the people to do it. We've got the resources to market to the entire county. The people who are running L&L now in their recycling program that's currently existing in Missoula County have also the experience of running the garbage collection for Republic for years past. And so consequently, that's established. Their ability to serve that need is established. And what Republic would wants you to impose is a full-blown countywide program before you can issue a permit. And as a practical matter, that doesn't make much sense. A person has to start somewhere, right? And what happened in Gallatin County? They started small and they grew big, and they have created a marketplace in Gallatin County that has broader services for better prices, and the people there are quite happy with it, including West Yellowstone, who's once again now paying less than they were when Republic was serving them. Mr. Mercer spoke for 29 and a half minutes before he said the word Gallatin County. And the reason for that is Gallatin County is sort of the test tube here. You allowed L&L to serve Gallatin County and see what happened with respect to the services that are provided there. And the request now is to allow Missoula County to have those same benefits, so that when people are dissatisfied with price, as they are here, it's remarkable how consistent the survey is with the shippers who said, we have these problems with prices, we have these problems with services. And if you look at the survey, you see, 1 in 5 people do have problems with the services, and yet half the people have problems with the pricing. And so you have Mr. Rogala had some astute questions of Dr. Tyler about monopoly pricing when you have a regulatory environment, and the only way you can penetrate that market is by permitting new haulers. Well, in this case, look how hard Republic has fought at the regulatory level. Look how bad they want to keep that monopoly power. Look how high they're trying to set the bar to competition. And what do you suppose that is? They want to leave the market concentration at 1 and continue to have the ability to charge people in Missoula County more than any place else in the state, and to continue to charge in 2 ways, right? Missoula County pays more than anybody else in the state in any other market. And within the markets that Republic competes, it charges people in Missoula County more than any place else in the state. And it wants to keep that power. And that's why we've been at this for over a year. And that's what we have 5-day hearing. And we have all these witnesses and exhibits and all the spilled ink and mounds and reams of paper to look at, is that Republic is fighting this because it wants to benefit itself at the cost of the public. Consequently, we urge that the application be granted. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we will go to questions from the commissioners next. Questions from the commissioners. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Ms. Chairwoman. Mr. Mercer, need you to help me understand truly what you were saying about the statute calling for somebody, a Class C licensee, to be able to be equipped to service all people at all times in the whole area. In like the city of Billings, I imagine other places where you have school district, the school district gives out a contract to the school bus drivers, and it isn't as if another company comes in and gradually takes that over. They have to be able to do everything all at one time, because one company is going to supplant the other one. In the absence of L&L, in this case, pushing out Republic entirely, and therefore not being able to service everybody in the county, it seems to me the statute, and please help me understand this, it seems to me the statute can't really be saying that a company coming in has to be able to perform all the services for everybody at the same time, as if the other company isn't doing anything at all. Yeah. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioner O'Donnell. Thank you for the question. And I think I understand it. And let me first say, the argument isn't that in order to comply, if the commission decides to grant the application, the argument isn't that all customers would need to be served by L&L in the first year. The statutory language is, the second prong is the likelihood of the proposed service. And again, the proposed service by Mr. Johnson is the entire county.
Mhm.
He is not saying, I will serve the city of Missoula. He's not saying, I will serve rural areas outside of the city of Missoula. He is saying, I am going to serve all points within Missoula County. So the test, the statutory prong is the likelihood of the proposed service being permanent and continuous throughout 12 months of the year. So the argument we're making is you can have no confidence based upon what's in this record, the lack of the business plan, the lack of any information about routes that would be run. Frankly, the fact that the proof is there hasn't even been any sort of analysis of what those separate markets even are. So that's the test. Are they capable of meeting what they say they want to do on a county-wide basis on a continuous and permanent basis through 12 months? And our argument is not. So they don't need to serve every single customer. They don't need to fully displace, but they have to have the capacity in terms of the budget that they would have, the staffing they would have, the essentially awareness and operational ability to serve customers countywide based upon their application. They can't do that.
Commissioner O'Donnell, follow up.
Thank you. Mr. Rhodes, I think if I understood you correctly, you said that Dr. Tyler did not say that prices would rise in a competitive environment, but it seems to me, I recall he did say that. And that he said that because of the density and whatever else like that, he said that that prices would rise because of the cost of service for each individual person. But and I'm trying to understand that. It would seem to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, it would seem to me that the prices would rise only if that entity wanted to maintain its total profits. That if that had to remain the same and they had fewer customers, then the price would have to go up per customer. Am I misunderstanding Dr. Tyler's testimony?
Madam Chair, Commissioner, I don't believe you're misunderstanding. I think that is a very good characterization of an important portion of his testimony. He did say, I believe, that that economic theory doesn't necessarily predict a price increase or a price decrease based on studies in the past. It's been both, depending on where you look. He didn't look anywhere in Montana, so it's hard to compare apples and oranges there. But he didn't give us a clear testimony one way or the other as to what actually would happen in his mind if there was a competitor in Missoula County if L&L was granted. His testimony was, it may or it may not, which I'm not sure what that proves, but that's how I understood his testimony.
One more question, please.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It was the assertion in the record that there was evidence of monopolistic pricing. And I'm just curious that within the record, was there any testimony explaining the justification for the roughly 7% price increase from 2020 to 2021? I don't recall seeing any discussion of that, but I'm
Madam Chair, Commissioner O'Donnell, Republic steadfastly refused to provide any information to justify any of its price positions. So whether there were increases or what the base was or why it was increased, that wasn't supplied to us. And it certainly wasn't supplied in the hearing. So they haven't sought to justify that on any basis because they won't disclose what their basis is.
Do you agree with that, Mr. Mercer? Okay. Oh,
I think the whole question on pricing, if I understand what the reference you're making on monopolistic pricing, there is a chart in the record that talks about pricing in the city of Bozeman. And what you hear from L&L is they believe that the Gallatin County example suggests that when there was a market entrant, that prices went down in Gallatin County. One of the things that I think what you may be thinking of is we discussed at maybe not at length, but we discussed what it is that we see in that chart in Bozeman. And what we see in the chart in Bozeman, you've got the city of Bozeman in that market, you've got Republic in that market, and you have L&L in that market. And we made the point that this idea that you could have multiple parties and the addition of a second party in the Missoula market would necessarily reduce prices. We made the point that in Bozeman, in the city of Bozeman, L&L's rate is actually higher than what Republic's rate is. So, and I agree with your characterization of monopolistic pricing from Dr. Tyler, which is to say, this idea that prices are going to go down merely because someone comes into the market is belied by the fact that there could be a number of people who see prices that go up as a result of potential behavior of the entrant into the market. What you have now is certainty, and you're going to have the risk that as you have a disruption in the market, that there are going to be people that will pay a lot more and potentially priced out of the market. So it is our view that this idea of Dr. Cross is that the mere entry of L&L in the market, where you would have an oligopoly or a duopoly, is not going to equate to a reduction of pricing. And you can also go back and look at the record in that 2018 docket where there, I think, is a lot of discussion about how prices did not go down in significant segments of the market in Gallatin County after L&L came in the market. So that is all part of that last record.
Mr. Chairman, just a brief follow-up.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you. But Mr. Mercer, again, I'm just trying to, was there any, I said there was an assertion of monopolistic pricing of the incumbent charging, increasing fees because they could. Okay, because there was no choice. Did Republic attempt to explain on the record why the justification for that particular price increase of as much as I can figure 7% from 2020 to 2021? Okay.
I don't think we can recall whether there is specific testimony as to that year.
Okay.
We do remember conversations about pricing as part of testimony, but whether there is anything that is specific to that year, I don't know, as I sit here.
Thank you. That was my recollection also. That's why I wanted clarification. Sorry, Mr. Rhodes seems to want.
Madam Chair, Commissioner O'Donnell, specifically, there was no evidence offered by Republic to say, well, our prices have gone up, we're paying more for our drivers, our cost of capital has gone up, we've had to invest more in new trucks. There was no evidence whatsoever from a cost perspective to justify any of those rate hikes. That's my recollection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and I know that Chairman Brown has some questions. Chairman Brown, would you like to go now, or would you like to defer to your colleagues first?
Oh, with the chairwoman's indulgence, I'll go ahead and ask my questions now.
Please go ahead.
Where I'd like to start is by asking Mr. Rhodes what weight the commission should accord to his argument in his opening statement this afternoon about the paucity of shipper witnesses brought by Republic. And I ask this question because Mr. Rhodes acknowledged at the very outset of his remarks that the burden lies with the applicant in this matter. And so, Mr. Rhodes, I'd like you to explain to the commission what weight and or even relevance the commission should accord for Republic either putting on or not putting on shipper witnesses.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Brown, thank you. Well, a couple of different perspectives on that. First, universally, the shippers that testified in this case testified to poor service, high price, and a desire for competition. That's the record. There's no contradiction from any shipper on that point. And so if it is implied by Republic that there are other shippers out there that are happy and they just refuse to testify or wouldn't testify along those lines, then they were available to rebut the proof that we put on. That proof stands unrebutted. And consequently, that's the record that we have. Now, the case law suggests pretty strongly that shipper witness testimony is to be weighed heavily. And that in the past, decisions have been made solely on shipper witness testimony with respect to need. And, in this case, there was every opportunity and every incentive, huge incentive for Republic to find even one shipper witness who would testify as to their satisfaction and would on cross-examination not equivocate as to whether, we feel the price may be too high, we feel that the service isn't sufficient. And that, it seems to me, is equally weighty in that if a person has power to put on evidence that would support their position and they pass on that, we both sides had a certain amount of time. We put on 8 shipper witnesses in the time we were allotted. And I can understand that you have to make decisions about how much time to spend with each different kind of witness. So Republic could have said, well, we want to talk to Dr. Tyler a lot, and we want to talk to, the county's officer a lot. So we'll just put on one shipper. We could bring on others, but we'll just put on one to sort of carry the flag and be the emblem for the dissenting shippers, the ones that are happy and the ones that don't want competition. But we didn't see that. And the reason that we didn't see that is because either they wouldn't testify to that or on cross-examination, they would equivocate. And so while I totally agree that Republic doesn't have a burden of proving that the people are happy with it, they do have the burden of rebutting the proof that we've supplied. And they totally passed on that, didn't take the opportunity and said, what we're going to do is argue that because it's just anecdotal, that it's not sufficient. And we know from the case law that shipper witness testimony is sufficient to establish the burden that has to be carried. And hopefully that's responsive to Commissioner Brown's question.
Mr. Rhodes, I would say your argument is that the fact that you put on witnesses and then Republic didn't put on witnesses implicates certain or make certain implications that may not otherwise be supported by the record. But with that question, I would then ask you, Mr. Rhodes, that let's talk about the statutory construct and the burden question. You certainly have acknowledged that it is the applicant's burden to prove that they have met the statutory requirements set forth for having the commission grant an application, correct?
That's correct. Yes, thank you.
And so what I would like to drill down on is that certainly the determination of public convenience and necessity is, as we know, comprised essentially of 4 elements: carrier fitness, public need, existing carrier's ability to meet the need, and then harm to existing carriers contrary to the public interest, correct?
Yeah, agreed, Chairman, or Commissioner Brown, thank you.
And then competition can be considered, correct?
That's correct.
And so with that stated, is it your reading of the statute that it is your client's burden to meet every, what I would call, element of this statutory scheme? Or is there some kind of weighing that we do on each of the elements? Do you follow?
I think so. And the conceptual approach, if I understand it correctly, Commissioner Brown, is that for each element, there has to be a preponderance of evidence in favor of the application. And what we mean by a preponderance of evidence is that more likely than not. And so if you imagine the scales of justice, for example, and the scales of justice are even because both pans are empty of evidence. If we place enough evidence into the pan that belongs to the applicant in order to make it move at all, if it budges, if our evidence is sufficient to tip those scales at all, even by the slightest amount, then the preponderance of evidence is met. In other words, it's more likely than not. And so with respect to fitness, the question is it more likely than not that L&L is a fit carrier for the Missoula County marketplace? Is it more likely than not that there's a public need that needs to be satisfied in the Missoula marketplace that's not currently being satisfied? Is it more likely than not that Republic will or either declines or can't meet that need? And finally, is it more likely than not that the public interest will be served by that competition that we're proposing? And so that's sort of the conceptually how I look at the burden of proof. Every element has to be satisfied by more likely than not. And I believe it certainly has in this case. And with respect to fitness, by a lot more than that. With respect to need, we see at least a dozen different kinds of service benefits, notwithstanding the price question, a dozen different kinds of service benefits that L&L could bring to the marketplace that don't currently exist. And then we see evidence, and I know Republic disagrees about this, but if you look at Exhibit 8, we see lots of evidence that Missoula County is paying more than anybody else in Montana. We see no evidence from a cost perspective of why that should be the case. We see no one talks about, well, costs are more in Missoula County for fuel. Costs are more in Missoula County for trucks. Costs are more in Missoula County for drivers and mechanics and that sort of thing. There's no evidence along those lines. We just see that the price is higher in Missoula County and no one wants to explain why. We asked in discovery.
Mr. Rhodes, I'm going to interrupt you there. You're going far afield of the question I asked, which related to
my apologies.
Burden. So, Mr. Mercer, do you agree with Mr. Rhodes' statement as to the burden and particularly as to the application to each, what I would call, element under the statute?
I don't, Chairman Brown. The first thing I want to say about this is that I think Justice Baker's opinion in McGree is important because she notes that the place to start the analysis for the court is based upon what the statute requires. So we agree with that. We agree that the commission needs to first look at the language in 6912-323. And I don't agree that there needs to be an evaluation of each factor and a presumption reached with respect to each factor. I think it's a multi-party test multi-pronged test that the commission has to undertake in making its determination. And so I think I've got a little bit of a different read on it than Mr. Rhodes, but the starting point for my difference of view is that I think you've got to go to the statute in the first instance and look at those factors, and not the test that you articulated, Chairman Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Mercer. There's been a lot of discussion both at the evidentiary hearing held in this matter, and again, let me commend counsel to this matter for the quality work they did here about price. And then, of course, that question has come up again during this argument. So looking at the statutory scheme, it's my understanding, and I have not gone through one of these Class D hearings before, but certainly my understanding from looking back through prior decisions that we do not regulate price as the Public Service Commission. And so I would ask both counsel to identify where exactly the evidence that is put on price as to which of the elements that they believe that goes to, if you will. I'll start with you, Mr. Rhodes.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Brown, I think the price issue goes to public need. And, I apologize if I'm repeating myself, but the public needs a choice with respect to price because there's no other way to regulate that under the statutory scheme. And so if the prices are higher than are justified by cost in Missoula County, then there's a public need for a better priced quality service. So it would go to the second element. If you talk about the elements that of the McGree Corporation case, the first identified in the decision is, quote, whether the new operation or service will serve a useful public purpose responsive to a public demand or need. And so if we look at it from the perspective of that case law, then the price is part of determining whether the new operation is responsive to public demand or need. And so if there's a price that's being paid in Missoula County that's not justified by cost, that can't be and hasn't been justified by cost, then the public needs a choice. And since no regulatory body has the authority to regulate that price, then competition would be the way to regulate that price. And that's what we think we've satisfied here and is necessary here.
Mr. Mercer.
Thanks, Chairman Brown. And I think the simple answer to your question is that nowhere in the statute is there any discussion about price as a consideration that the commission should undertake as part of the multi-pronged analysis there. That test is the transportation service being furnished or that will be furnished, the likelihood the proposed service being permanent and continuous 12 months, the fact that the proposed transportation service may have on other forms of transportation service, the four-pronged test that you referred to earlier, Chairman Brown, in McGree and in its predecessors, whether the applicant is fit, whether the applicant has demonstrated a public need, whether the existing applicant meets that need, and the harm that entry by the applicant to the market would have on the public interest. There isn't any consideration of pricing set forth in either one of those configurations. We obviously have tried to engage because of L&L's insertion of that issue as a factor, but we agree with you that the commission doesn't have rate regulation authority in this context, and the statute and the test don't speak to price as a consideration for the commission with a Class D application.
Thank you, Mr. Mercer. Madam Chair, one additional question.
Yes, please go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
I'd like to pick up on a matter that Mr. Mercer referenced during his remarks, and that's market analysis and the commission's prior directive through order that the parties, not the least of which the applicant, provide market analysis. Mr. Rhodes, I have read through your proposed findings of fact and conclusions of law, and I am hoping that you can point me to where you believe the records supports your clients providing the market analysis that the commission has otherwise requested through its prior decision.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Brown. So the market analysis in this case is a monopoly market. There's one provider in Missoula County. L&L proposes to serve Missoula County as it does in Gallatin County, and that is by serving customers who request service. So the entire county. And its means of doing that, provided in the testimony, is to use the local knowledge of the former employees of Republic with their intimate knowledge of the marketplace, so that if someone in Condon or someone in Frenchtown or someone on East Central in Missoula asks for a service from L&L, then the provider will be, or the people with the experience of providing that will be able to identify the service that needs to be provided and provide it in a cost-effective way, sort of the practical nuts and bolts approach. Now, there's no identification of sub-markets in the county because that's not part of the application. The market, the county is analyzed as a whole. It's a monopoly as a whole, and any place that is required to be served, it will be served upon request, as it was in Gallatin County. So with respect to a document that says formal market analysis, there's none. With respect to a document that says formal business plan, there's none. But with respect to the approach to the market, the testimony is it will be the same as occurred in Gallatin County, and with under the use of extensive local knowledge and experience.
Mr. Rhodes, Madam Chair, follow up.
Mr. Chairman.
And Madam Chair, let me apologize for not working through the chair. That was a huge faux pas on my part. I apologize to the chair. Mr. Rhodes, this has been another matter that has weighed on me, both through the evidentiary portion of this hearing and today, is that there's been a lot of discussion about what has transpired in Gallatin County. And it seems to be, my impression is being used as a proxy for what may or may not occur in Missoula County. But I'm trying to determine what weight to give to all that testimony regarding Gallatin County, because obviously, and on its face, Gallatin County is not Missoula County. Could you address that point, Mr. Rhodes?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Brown, yes, thank you. I think that there are a number of similarities that have been testified to between Gallatin County and Missoula County. For example, Gallatin County has one sort of central urban center like Missoula County. It also has far reaches that are difficult to get to and have only one major highway to those reaches. For example, Condon, Sealy Lake, as compared to West Yellowstone, for example. And then you have these far-flung rural areas that may have paved roads to them, may have gravel roads to them, may have they may be mountainous terrain. They may, in the wintertime, there may be a great deal of snow. Both counties have sort of an itinerant population of students that come and go seasonally. Both counties have wildlife issues. Both counties have transfer stations that they use to serve the far reaches of the county. And so it seems to me that the best proof of what a market participant can do in a proposed new market is to look at what it has done where it has been operating. And so if we had a situation where for example, when L&L was granted a Class D haulers permit for the county of Gallatin, it didn't have a track record in hauling Class D, whether it be in a county similar to Missoula County or Gallatin County or otherwise. And so it was nevertheless determined that it would be in the public interest to add that competition into the mix. And here we have a track record. We can point to the management skill of Mr. Johnson and his team with respect to serving these far-flung reaches, these rural areas, and trying to compete in the urban areas, trying to compete in the towns that are at the edges of the county, in managing exponential growth, in managing the financial wherewithal that's required to buy trucks and hire personnel. So there's much less speculation in this situation with regard to what is likely to happen, although none of us has a crystal ball. The best evidence for what will happen in the future is what has happened in the past. There are sufficient similarities. Of course, there's differences. There may be differences here and there, but there are sufficient similarities between Gallatin County and Missoula County that it serves as a very strong predictor of what L&L is capable of doing in competing with the same company in Missoula County as it competes with in Gallatin County. And so in our view, that's compelling. We don't have to speculate about what might happen and what the management skill might be and what the performance might be with respect to either service or price. We can see a very similar geographic area being served by a company, and the predictions that the new company can serve the new area in the same way are buttressed strongly by that past performance.
Madam Chair, if I may direct that to Mr. Mercer and have him briefly respond.
Madam Chair and Chairman Brown, thank you for giving me a chance to rebut that. I think the first point that was made, not in response to your question there, but Mr. Rhodes earlier, the quote I wrote down was, "The business plan is Gallatin County." And I think I will answer your question in saying Gallatin County is very different than Missoula County. I think the rural stretches of Missoula County, when you look at the distances and the populations of those locations, are distinguishable. You know, Greeno and Potomac and Tura and Clinton and Huson and the whole list, I think, is essentially in the record. Those are very different places to serve than stretches along I-90 at Three Forks and Manhattan. So I think there are significant differences. He answered your question earlier, though, that they didn't do any sort of a market concentration analysis in response to paragraph 107 of the order. And more importantly, your question, to say that the business plan is Gallatin County, that completely ignores the fact that the commission has said we need more information than we've required in the past to understand what's going on. Paragraph 107 said this operational market analysis could include, among other evidence, and then it lists price and route comparisons. You can't say that Gallatin County, the business plan is Gallatin County, because obviously price and route comparisons in Gallatin County are irrelevant to what would be done in Missoula County. There also is an admonition that another thing that could be offered would be a business plan with sufficient financial, route, and service options. You cannot supplant that requirement, or that, I shouldn't call it a requirement, that that strongly worded suggestion from the commission that this is sort of information it needs. You cannot say because it was done in Gallen County, we can just assume that we can be confident the way those services are going to be rendered in Missoula County. So I think that there's a complete absence in this record of anything that would say merely because Mr. Johnson is operated in Gallen County, we're disinterested in any of the information that we listed in 107. And it's obviously significant because what's reflected in the order in 2019 was what this commission thought was lacking to make a decision in the applicant's favor at that time. It was that was the precise sort of information that the commission found wanting. And so having said, this is what we need, they come back and they say, well, the business plan is Gallatin County. It's a complete absence of any sort of indication of what would happen here. And as I said at the outset, I think alone bars the commission from granting the application.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no further questions.
Madam
Thank-
Chair, may I address?
That's up to Commissioner Brown as he was asking this questioning. Commissioner Brown, Mr. Rhodes has asked if he can address this.
I will. My questions have been answered, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. I do want to jump in just with one on one topic here before I go to my colleagues, and I'll save the rest of my questions for later. But I just want to go to this because it just came up, and that is this question, Mr. Mercer, about the commission's order of 2019. Are you asserting that that order is binding on this application?
Thanks for the question, Madam Chair, and absolutely that is our position. I don't think that it can be anything other than binding because the commission has said right in the order, I'll read it, without evidence to investigate these issues, the commission's analysis is less robust. To address these issues, the commission puts all future applicants and protestants in Class D PCN applications concerning. Sorry, you're right. Where should, I'll just start. All right, thanks. To address these issues, the commission puts all future applicants and protestants in Class D PCN applications concerning large and complex service areas on notice that both parties will be expected to provide operational and market analysis to support their arguments. And then the commission cites two cases, Roselle Corporation and Waste Management Partners. The parenthetical describing Roselle says, putting the protestant on notice of the commission's expectations of future performance. So that citation is there to say, when the commission wants to alter the precedent in terms of the way it has dealt with applications, it's got to do it in a way that the parties are on notice. And there can be no question that the parties are on notice here because the parties are the same in this docket as they were in the docket that led to the 2019 order. So yes, it is binding, and we don't think there's any discretion for the commission to avoid it.
I'm a little bit confused because as I understand it, the commission's required to follow MAPPA for rulemaking. And your position is that essentially this is a rule that must apply because the commission rendered that expectation in a prior order?
That's, Madam Chair, that is correct. And that's why the language is set forth the way it is and why Roselle is cited as a case that stands for the proposition that that's how the commission directs parties to comply with its expectations. And in this case, the identical parties were told, if there's a future application, you need to treat this as the new demand from the commission that we're going to utilize to process applications.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to my colleagues.
Madam Chair, if I may be heard on that question with respect to the.
Yes, I will allow that. Go ahead, Mr. Rhodes, quickly, if you would.
Yes, Madam Chair. I think that the point of that guidance is that applicants and protestants need to provide this or similar evidence. It's not exclusive, that it's not an exclusive list. And if you look at, for example, Exhibit 8, there's 22 pages of market analysis between Gallatin County and Missoula County within that. Now, it might not be under one of those specific headings, but it's similar types of information about prices and service within those marketplaces. And I think it fits within the catch-all. Whether or not that's binding, it's certainly satisfied here.
Thank you. Now I see that Vice Chair Johnson has some questions and Commissioner Pinocci has some questions, and I do have some questions too. So I expect we're going to run a little bit later than 3:30 this afternoon. So we'll start with Vice Chair Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I have what I think are just three very brief questions. At least that's my intent. First, Mr. Rhodes, and I want to make sure I understood what you said correctly. I believe I heard you say that neither rule nor statute require that a carrier serve all points within the service area. Therefore, it would be okay, even though it's not the stated intent, if L&L came in and in fact did not initially serve all points within the service area. Did I understand that correctly?
Madam Chair, Vice Chair Johnson, thank you. I guess my point is that to qualify as a Class D carrier, the statute doesn't require, I mean, there's a minimum requirement that L&L meets. L&L's application and intention, as testified to at the hearing, is to serve anybody in Missoula County that asks for the service. And so there are two elements of my answer. One is the statute is the minimum. Two is the evidence is the strongly declared intention to serve the entire county.
Thank you. Follow up, Madam Chair.
Follow up.
There's been two competing interpretations offered with regard to the results of the customer service survey that was put forth by you all. That's always challenging for us when we have to choose between interpretations of the same data. I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything here, Mr. Rhodes. Is there any evidence introduced into the record with regard to customer satisfaction for L&L customers that we could use as an apples and apples comparison with the customer service satisfaction numbers that have been presented to us with regard to Republic customers?
Madam Chair, Vice Chair Johnson, I think that the strongest evidence for customer satisfaction with L&L in Gallatin County is indirect, and that is the explosive growth they've had of their customer base and their ability to serve that market, compete with Republic in that market, and to basically do a wonderful job of serving as a hauler in Gallatin County. But there has been no survey evidence that would be a direct analogy.
Thank you. And one more, Madam Chairman, if I may.
Vice Chair Johnson.
For Mr. Mercer. Mr. Mercer, would you tell me the absence of shipper witnesses in behalf of Republic, was that a result of your having solicited witnesses who refused to testify, or was there in fact an attempt to bring shipper witnesses forward or not on the part of Republic?
Thank you, Vice Chairman Johnson. We had two shipper witnesses. We may not have called them shipper witnesses, but Kim Luttrell from the Chamber of Commerce and Shane Stack from Missoula County are both customers. They both live in the county and testified. In terms of, did we make any attempt beyond calling those witnesses to go out and talk to customers and see if they wanted to testify? We did not. And I would say that I think if the commission looks at not only the burden of proof, but whether there's ever been a suggestion from the commission that the protestant should bring in shippers to talk about services rendered. I don't believe the commission's ever done that. I don't believe the commission has ever said, let's sort of have a battle of the shipper witnesses. If the applicant is going to bring in 10, let's have the protestant match them so we can sort of evaluate what the shippers say. I don't think the commission's ever suggested that that was something that would be beneficial. And again, our view is there's an awful lot of evidence in this record about people's perceptions of Republic based upon 15,000 people who got questioned, and the fact that the local government, neither county or city, favor the application. So, but no, we did not put a bunch of witnesses on our list of our customers to testify.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're
That's all I
welcome.
have.
Commissioner Pinochi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a conference call I got to make in a few minutes. That's why I was in a hurry, and I'd like to be excused after my questions. Mr. Mercer, I was carefully listening to testimony about garbage being picked up between, say, 2 and 3 a.m. In New York City and Manhattan, the garbage is picked up around 3 a.m. The reason why is the traffic is so dense during the day. They just physically would stop traffic, and the car parking is so bad that it's hard to get the garbage off the street. So 3 a.m. Is a great time to pick it up. And also the safety issue, to have those garbage trucks work at 3 a.m. where the traffic is much less, they feel is improved. In fact, they try to do street maintenance when there's little or no traffic in the hours of 3, 4 a.m. Would you say, and of course, pollution's an issue. In the middle of the night, pollution can kind of escape from New York City. And when a garbage truck can back up thousands of cars, pollution is worse. And then, of course, people can't get where they're going. Missoula has the worst traffic jams, and of course, it has the worst smog of anywhere else in Montana. So it's a fair question to ask you, do you think picking up trash at that time is similar to reasons that they do in New York?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner Pinochi. And I think the answer is that there are a number of factors. I can't sit here now and say, and I don't think it's in the record, whether pollution dissipation is a factor. I think what is clear is that Republic is regularly communicating with the city and the county and trying to decide on all these factors that you've mentioned. How can we safely operate? How can we efficiently operate? And there is a rapport and a dialogue with people that are in local government in terms of the way those services are going to be delivered, just like any other public utility. And so it's that history, the fact that they've been in that market forever, trying to figure out how can we do this most safely, most efficiently, and without negative externalities. And to the extent that different issues can be accommodated that are of concern to the local governments, I think that's been a longstanding goal. But I can't specifically say that routes start at a particular time because of those issues. I can only say that there's a real attempt to do this in a way that meets the demand and satisfies the not only customers, but local government.
Follow up, Madam Chair.
We have got time for one more question before we need to go to a break, Commissioner Pinochi.
Have accidents decreased from doing garbage from 7 p.m., which is a very busy time in traffic, to picking up garbage to 3 a.m., or has it increased? Or we've had-
Commissioner Pinochi, I think I'm going to stop you there. I don't believe that was any part of the evidentiary record. Council can advise me differently if you feel otherwise, but I don't think that was part of the evidence. I don't think we can bring up new evidence today.
I believe that's correct, Commissioner Pinochi. I don't believe that there's anything in the evidence that talks about safety diminution as a result of the timing of a particular route.
Commissioner Pinochi, do you have another question?
No, but I'd like to point out that Mr. Rhodes brought this out.
Commissioner Pinochi, feel free to elaborate on that. I may have missed something.
Mr. Rhodes explained that there is a safety issue when he talked. And I thought it was important to point out that large cities or busy cities, and Missoula is the busiest in Montana, he said there was a safety issue. Now, I think it's important to note that in the bigger cities, they exactly pick up the garbage in the middle of the night because it's a safer time to do it and they have access to the garbage due to less parking. So I simply found it interesting that that point of view should be looked at. And I am concerned about safety. So being that Mr. Rose brought it up, I was just wondering if somebody has said we move to 3 a.m. because there's less accidents and we have access to garbage, because that's exactly why they do it in the larger cities.
Mr.
Thank you.
Rhodes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Patochi, I think the point I was trying to make, and maybe I was not artful in making this point, but I was discussing the shorter work shifts as being more safe, not that the start at 7 a.m. or 3 a.m. was safer, but the fact that L&L runs its shifts for 8 hours rather than 10 or 12. And the judgment of Mr. Johnson in his testimony is that's safer because the shifts are shorter.
And if I may be heard on that as well, because I now understand Commissioner Pinocci is noting that in his argument, Mr. Rhodes had talked about the fact that L&L starts at a different time than Republic and was using that as a proxy to say that L&L is providing service that's more convenient for people. And I think to Commissioner Pinocchi's point, what we think we demonstrated in the hearing is that there are safety issues, there are transportation issues, and we try to avoid those based upon timing and routes. And there's no question that if you're starting something at 5 a.m, the concerns that Commissioner Pinocchi noted are things that are avoidable, as opposed to if you're trying to do it at a time in sort of rush hour. There's no question about that. The other thing that I think we disagree with Mr. Rhodes on is if Missoula County says, we don't want you to be out on the roads before X, then obviously with our relationship with them, we're going to comply with that. But it's that communication with Missoula that allows us to do this efficiently in a safe way as possible with the routes that we run.
Okay. Thank you for the clarifications, gentlemen. And we do have a few more questions. I don't expect to go a lot longer. Our court recorder has asked for a break. You can go another 5 or 10 minutes, or you need a break at 5 minutes right now. Okay, let me just get a feel for how many more questions we have from commissioners.
Just one from me,
Okay.
possibly two.
And any other questions from any others? And we have legal counsel. Do you have questions? How about Zach Regala online? He may have some. Are you going to have questions, Zach?
Chair Fielder, no, I will not. Thank you.
Okay. It seems like we'll be able to wrap up within 10, 15 minutes then. Okay. Commissioner Pinocchi.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Mercer, Mr. Rhodes mentioned that garbage in Missoula is 2,700% more expensive than Great Falls. I wanted to see if you felt that was true. And if it is, then it seems reasonable that a garbage company would say, wow, we need to go to Missoula. What's your answer to that?
Yeah, I'm going to start by answering a question or an assertion that he's essentially saying every one of these markets is an apples to apples comparison. And it's not. So for instance, the Missoula market, the Republic drivers are unionized, and the wages that are paid pursuant to those collective bargaining agreements in Missoula are significantly higher than what is paid to those same workers in other markets. So to suggest that it's an apples to apples comparison is wrong. There are reasons why the rates are different in some of these communities. And we also don't believe, if you look in the record at what he is asking you to hang your hat on, it's phone survey evidence that doesn't tell you anything about where their customer is, what the services are that are being received. There's no comparison. This is back into, it's anecdotal information obtained by a phone call. It's exactly the sort of non-empirical data that this commission said it needed in the order in 2019. So no, we disagree that that is the difference in the rate in Great Falls or Cascade County. And we also think it's important that the commission understands that there are things in this market that are different than other markets that are going to drive some pricing. But no, we disagree with his assertion.
And follow up, Madam Chair.
Just a moment, just to clarify, I believe, Mr. Rhodes, you said 270%, not 2,700%. Is that correct?
That's certainly what I meant. If I said 2,700, I misspoke. So roughly 3 times as much in Missoula County as in Great Falls.
Okay. Commissioner Pinocci.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Rhodes, we're looking at this sharp contrast in price difference. So I think that that's a good point to bring out to everybody's attention. The price of a dump truck has increased the highest amount in the history of making dump trucks. Over $100,000 is the price increase on dump trucks just in the last few months. Price increases in tires and maintenance is the highest it's ever been. When you're able to, you'll have to expand, buy more trucks. Do you think you'll be competitive, or you'll be right back to the, 3 times higher than you are based on these incredible rate increases we're seeing across the board?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Pinosi, the comparisons that are made in Exhibit 8 on the 14th page with respect to the differences in prices in the different localities are based on prices and costs that were incurred by the companies at the time. So back in that 2020 timeframe. And so it obviously the inflation in all kinds of things, not just trucks and maintenance, but labor and the like, is going to push up the cost for everyone, whether they be L&L or Republic, or whether it be in Cascade County or Missoula. So it would be our expectation that they increase together. So those disparities, if you will, would still exist after the increase in all of the markets. But with regard to this specific record, that's speculation on my part. We don't have the information from the last 6 months.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No more questions.
Okay. Couple of questions from me. I think these are hopefully pretty quick, just some clarifications. I'll begin with Mr. Mercer. Mr. Mercer, in the proposed findings of fact that Republic submitted, I don't know if I need to give you the page and paragraph number, but it's page 8, it's paragraph 17. It says Republic employs 42 drivers. My question is, are those all full-time drivers? 2,080 hours a year? Yes, okay.
They are,
Thank you.
Madam Commissioner.
And next page, paragraph 22, it alludes to, or it states that there's a business plan that Republic has specific to its operations in Missoula County, which address how it will improve safety, improve customer service, deliver its services, and how it will continue to develop in the community. I do not recall if that was entered into the record. Has that been entered into the record?
There was testimony, Madam Chair, on the issue, but there isn't an exhibit in the record.
Okay, thank you. And there's a couple references here to Mr. Moss's, some changes that he made when he became the general manager in Missoula. And I remember you had some really lengthy testimony and a long background, but I don't recall when you started, when Mr. Moss started in Missoula. At what point did he take over as general manager in Missoula?
July of 2019.
July of 2019?
Correct.
Thank you. And there is a reference in Republic's submittal here also that points to the shipper witness complaints as being garden variety complaints. And that seems rather dismissive, but I'd like your opinion on what do you mean by garden variety complaints?
Madam Chair, that is language that was utilized by the commission in the 2019 order to describe this anecdotal proof that comes out from shippers. And in those instances, in the 2019 docket, the commission characterized those as garden variety complaints. We believe that maybe we could have called it, in this case, isolated complaints, and maybe, but we were using the reference that the commission had used to describe what the shippers had done in the previous docket.
Thank you. I hope we don't use that language again associated with complaints. Those were all the questions I had. Are there any questions? There's one more from Commissioner O'Donnell, and then we're going to go to legal counsel, I believe.
Yeah, I didn't have a question. I thought we were at the very end right here. I just wanted to say that I really appreciated the thoughtfulness of the responses of both parties. I've been in one jury trial in my life. One attorney spoke to the jury, the other one spoke to whomever, whoever citing legal things and whatever. And I really appreciate the respect shown by parties. And I think that both parties to this thing are very, very adequately represented. I really appreciate your demeanor. Thank you very much.
I think as we all do, Commissioner O'Donnell. And now one last opportunity, questions from legal staff, and there are no questions. So counsel, I wish to thank you all for your professional and thorough arguments. And we are ready to adjourn. For the record, the time is 3:42 p.m. This oral argument proceeding is adjourned.